Welcome to Just One Thing, the real estate podcast where we cut the noise and get to the good stuff. I'm your host, Chaya Klein with One Real Estate. Each episode, I sit down with a guest who knows their field inside and out to talk about things most people wish they understood before diving into real estate or business decisions. Whether you're buying, selling, leasing, renovating, or just trying to figure it all out, this show is here to give you the clarity, insight, and confidence you need to take the next step. Let's get into it. Today, I'm so excited because we're diving into one of the least understood but most critical pieces of the real estate puzzle, approvals. Everyone talks about deals, everyone talks about construction, but nothing happens without the right approvals. And the truth is, there's one name that comes up again and again in this space. If you're in Lakewood, Jackson, Toms River, Howell, chances are if a project needed to get approved, she was sitting at the table. I'm talking about Miriam Weinstein, attorney, strategist, and let's be real, probably the most behind the scenes person in half the developments around here. Miriam, first off, thank you so much for joining us. For people who don't know what you actually do, can you give us a little background of how you got here and what you actually do?
First of all, hi, thank you for that intro. Wow, now you pumped me up. Now I got to live up to that. Okay, so I'm a real estate attorney. I have been practicing law for the last 25 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, I actually started law school the night after my third son's bris.
Oh, wow.
Had my daughter during law school, so graduated
You're
law school.
not ambitious or anything.
I guess that's why we're friends. We get each other. Yeah, I graduated law school with 4 kids under the age of 7. So that's a little bit of my background. I initially worked at a big firm, Greenbaum Rose Smith in Woodbridge, for about 2 years. After that, I worked for A.B. Penzer in Lakewood, who actually was the land use attorney for many a time. He really was the Lakewood land use attorney. Definitely learned a lot from A.B., so I have to thank him. In between that, actually, while I was still at Greenbaum, I actually sat on the Lakewood Township zoning board for about a year or a year and a half. A.B. actually asked me to step down when I went to work for him because it would be a conflict of interest for him on every single application. But I will say that I definitely learned most of my land use experience first from working at Greenbaum with some of the biggest land use attorneys in the state, and then sitting on the zoning board because there's really no better place to get experience than to actually be in it yourself, sitting on the board.
I always say the best way that you can learn is just jump in and just get started.
Correct.
I'm sure that you are very learned and you went to school and you got your degree, but at the end of the day, doing the job is really where you get all your experience.
Correct. I did go to Rutgers Law School, but they don't teach you anything about land use or zoning. That's definitely one area they don't teach. In general, law schools don't teach much about real estate. Law school is really geared towards moot court and creating everybody to become a litigator. Now, obviously, there's a lot of land use litigation. I don't do that. When the files go to litigation, we forward them over to other people that specialize in that. The closest that I always say I get to court and get to use my dramatic side is to do land use work, where I get to go in front of zoning and planning boards. I just find this work so much more rewarding. I find the rules are more relaxed in front of a land use board. It's really lay people that are the quote unquote judges. It's not like you're walking into a courtroom and there's the judge in his robe. I don't know why that stiffness and the rules and the time frames. I guess when I started practicing law with actually 4 babies and had a 5th baby after that, it didn't appeal to me to have to be tied to those kind of time frames that I'd have to go into a courtroom and deal with. But there's a much more relaxed environment at a zoning board and a planning board, but it still gives me that same ability to use my dramatic side to me. And I was head of drama in high school. Definitely interests me. Obviously, besides, we didn't discuss this. I mean, you know this, but I don't know that your listeners know this. I'm also obviously a transactional real estate lawyer, and I do a lot of closings, both commercial and residential. So that's another part of my business. But the part that I really love, that I would say is my baby, is really the zoning and the land use. It's what I'm passionate about, and it's really my main area of expertise.
We definitely hear your passion, and we definitely hear your drama. I'm happy you get to use that side of you sometimes. Most people picture approvals as boring paperwork. And like you said, there's definitely some drama. Take us a little bit behind the scenes. What's it really like when you're representing a client in front of a planning board?
first of all, I think we should go back to the process. In other words, the process doesn't start at the planning board or zoning board. So the process really starts way back at the beginning. Client calls and says, I have this piece of property either that I'm looking to purchase, or I have this property that I own, and I want to know conceptually, does this work?
Right.
So the smart clients bring me in at that stage of the game.
I was going to ask you, actually, at what point do people call you?
So it varies. Like I said, the smart ones bring me up at the conceptual stage, which is the best way to do it because, you really want to have both your lawyer and your engineer involved initially from the get-go, because we each bring our areas of expertise to the table. And there's really two pieces that have to go hand in hand. There's going to be the engineering piece, and there's also going to be the legal side of it. But a lot of times they don't. And a lot of times I first get the application when it's, hey, we need to get a legal notice to the paper that has to get to the newspaper and to publish 10 days prior.
Wait. We're going very fast. Okay, so walk us through the process a little bit. So let's just say that conceptually, so we get a better idea, right? I have a property I want to purchase. I have a idea. I am looking to put up an office building, let's just say.
Right.
Now I come to you. And where do we go from there?
So I would say we need to get an engineer on board. We need to team up with an engineer. If it's Lakewood, probably New Lines. They're definitely the ones that do the most Lakewood land use work. So let's just stick with that. I'd say to them, let's call New Lines. Let's get them on board. Let's look at this together. Now, I may say to them, send me a copy of the tax map, send me a copy of your survey, and let's take a look at that even before we get the New Lines or the engineer on board, just to look and see basically what are we dealing with. The first things that we want to know is what zone is the property in. We want to know is the particular use that they want to put there a permitted use. So for example, if we're looking to put up an office building, I'd want to know what zone is the property in. Does that zone permit office buildings to be built? If it does not permit office buildings, then what are the surrounding uses? Will this use generally be in keeping with the character of the neighborhood? Because even if it's not a permitted use, we could still get it approved at the zoning board. It just wouldn't be at the planning board. And by the way, we're jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah, we are jumping ahead because for our listeners, right, somebody who hasn't gone through the process, what's the difference of the planning board? What's the difference of the zoning board?
Right. I'm just thinking that. So the planning board is where an applicant would go if they have a conforming application. So if
when you say conforming,
I'm going to explain that right now. So if the use is a permitted use in the zone, but the relief that they need, either it's fully conforming, meaning it's a commercial use, so it's got to get an approval in front of the planning board because it does. Because the municipal land use law requires that pretty much any commercial use, unless it's just the same commercial use, it's a property that's been used for one commercial use being switched to another commercial use, then it may not. But typically every commercial use would need an approval. Or it may be that you have a property that the use works, the use conforms with the requirements of the zone, but the setbacks don't work. So for example, you're only allowed to have a 25-foot front yard setback and they're asking for 23 feet. So that would need a variance from the planning board, for example, or the lot coverage. You're only allowed, let's say, to cover 30% of your lot in most zones.
Can we just discuss lot coverage for a second? I think people get very confused what lot coverage means, setbacks means.
I'm going to get to that in 1 minute. I feel like we keep skipping around and I apologize because I think it's a lot my fault. No, so just to explain the difference between the planning board and zoning board before we get to that, the zoning board is typically where you go when the use doesn't conform. So you need to get use variance relief. Now you may need other relief as well. So it could be that you want to put an office building, for example, on New Hampshire Avenue, which I actually have one that's supposed to go Monday night. You want to put an office building on New Hampshire Avenue. The zone does not permit it. In addition to that, they may need certain variances. For example, the setbacks may not work. So now we can explain what the setbacks are. So for example, if you're in, let's say you're in the R12 zone, and in the R12 zone, you're allowed a 10-foot side yard setback, but you need a combined side yards of 25 feet. So what does that mean? That means any property that's going to be built in the R12 zone has to have a minimum of 10 feet on each side. But then it also has to have the two sides combined have to add up to 25. So effectively it's 10 and 15, it's 12 and 12 and a half, something like 12 and 13, sorry. Something that is going to comply with those requirements. You also have required front yard setbacks. So for example, if we go back to the R12 zone in Lakewood, it would be a 30-foot front yard setback. If you're coming to me and you want to put the house 25 feet from your front yard setback, that would require a variance as well. Then you asked me what's lot coverage. So typically there's a certain amount of percentage of coverage of the lot with all impervious coverage. So that includes your driveways and your decks and everything else. Typically in most of the zones, it's either 30% or 35% in some of the, like R75, in some of the zones that have smaller lot sizes, the coverage is a little bit larger and would be 35%. But that is the maximum amount that the entire footprint of the home, together with all impervious coverage, could exceed. And that is another variance that is very typically needed. By the way, there is one other time that you would go to the zoning board. And the other time you would go to the zoning board would be if you have a spot lot. And a spot lot is where you have one lot that you're just dealing with in and of itself. For example, you want to build a new house. You buy an existing lot on, pick any street you want.
123 Banana Street.
123 Banana Street. So you want to put up a house at 123 Banana Street, but you don't meet the setback relief. So you want to put up a house that's going to be, it needs 38% lot coverage. Banana Street is in the R75 zone, so it allows lot coverage of 35%, but you want to put 38%. The side yard setbacks there would be minimum 7 feet on one side, 15 feet combined, and you want to do 5 and 5, and you want to have a total combined of 10 feet. So you would need all these various bulk variances, as we would call them. That would actually go to the zoning board rather than the planning board. And it actually gets even more complicated on a spot lot, which is you even have to request from each of your neighbors if the neighbor will sell you a piece of their property or if they would want to buy your lot off of you at fair market value. And we actually have to go to the extent of sending letters to each of the neighbors on all three sides of the property to make sure that they wouldn't either want to buy your property or be able to sell you a piece in order for you to come to the zoning board.
Wow.
Yeah, just a point of interest.
Just a point of interest. Sounds like a lot. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit about the difference between the planning board, the zoning board, a little bit about the setbacks, can you walk us through the process, which we started initially? So I come to you now and I say, I found this property, 123 Banana Street, and I want to put up an office building. The zoning does not allow it today. What would be my next step?
So the next step, like I said, would be to get me preferably a survey. If they don't have a survey yet, they're just looking at purchasing. The seller doesn't have a survey. We'd open up the tax map. We'll take a look at the tax map. We'll look at the dimensions of the property. We'll look at the dimensions of the properties around it. We'll discuss what the uses are of those surrounding properties. Then, like I said, we'd probably get an engineering firm involved, and we'd actually have them come in, do the survey. We'd want a topography survey. We'd want to be able to see the topography of the property and everything else. And then,
why is that important? Why do we need a topography survey?
The topography survey is not necessarily important for the zoning per se. It's really more important ultimately for the construction of the property. They would definitely want to know if they're going to need retaining walls, if they're going to have to build up the earth, et cetera, et cetera. Once we're doing a survey, typically on any property that we'd be considering potential development, whether it's for a house or whether it's for a building, my recommendation would be to get the topography survey. I'll tell you why. Because the boundary survey, which is literally just the surveyor coming out and drawing up the boundaries of the property, you would need that as part of the topography survey. So it's like doing the work double. If you're going to order a boundary survey and then only after you decide for sure you're going forward with it, go for the topography survey, you're doing the work twice. It doesn't really pay. A topography survey is significantly more expensive than a boundary survey, but it makes sense because you save money because you're not double doing that. You're not
doing the work twice.
Doing the work twice.
So once you order the survey, you got the engineering company, they came down, they did this, both the boundary, the topography. Where do we go from there?
So from there, they'll probably draw up a concept sketch. And hopefully they do share the concept sketch with me so that I can give them my feedback in terms of how do I think the board will take to it. And again, just from my years and years of experience, especially in Lakewood, I can pretty much take a look at a concept sketch and say, I don't know if this is going to go so well. I think you're asking for a little too much on, the side yard setback or the front yard setback or whatever variance it is, the coverage, and give them a better idea to kind of guide them as to what would make the most sense. Ultimately, we probably will have a Zoom meeting together with the engineering firm and the applicant, the client, to try to figure out what we think with all of us together, what would work best for the client's needs to maximize, obviously, the size usually of the structure to meet the client's needs. And also something that I think is approvable. And I always say, some of the engineers that I work with, I say there's the glass half full and the glass half empty. Some are like the glass is always full. Yeah, just go with everything. Just take everything. Just draw it up and go for the max. And I sometimes just look at it and I'm really a realist and go, why do you think the zoning board would approve this? They've never approved anything close to this. I don't think this makes sense. And maybe it just makes sense to cut it down to something that we really think that could be approved. And obviously there are always going to be those clients who want to go for the gamble and they want to go for the whole thing and they're willing to spend the money. And then I have to have the conversation. You realize that this probably won't get approved on try one because it's definitely an overly ambitious project. We could tweak it after we get to the board. You realize it may get denied. You may have to redo it and come back with something else. And that brings us to another topic. I just don't want to get off tangent, but there is something called res judicata. And that's if something gets denied at a land use board, you're barred under the doctrine of res judicata from bringing the exact same application back in front of that board. So if somebody goes in front of the zoning board and gets denied, they'd have to make a substantial change in order for it not to be barred the second time around. So we also have to think about, even if you're the gambling type and you want to go for the overly ambitious application, what happens if it gets denied? Then where do you stand? Because you definitely have to make some sort of a change in order to bring it back. So all of these things come into play to get that initial, sketch done. And then once we agree on the initial sketch, then the plans get drawn up. And after the plans are drawn up and everything is tweaked, then they go back and forth again between the engineer and myself and the architect, by the way. I forgot to discuss the architect.
Where does the architect come in over here?
So the architect also would come. We need to all really work in tandem because obviously if you're constructing an office building, we need the architect to come up with the plans, at least of the exterior of the structure, in order before the engineering firm can really draw up a plot plan. They can't do a plot plan without knowing exactly what's going to be on the architectural plans. Those two have to match. Even if we're dealing with a house and a residential project, I definitely want to see those architectural plans very early on because there are certain things that we know won't fly in front of the zoning board. I mean, I could give you examples if you want to know.
Yeah, we would love examples.
For example, in Lakewood, you can only have one apartment in your basement. If something comes and it looks like there's going to be more than one apartment in that basement, that's not getting approved at the zoning board. So don't come to me and show me plans with 2 kitchens. That'll never go over. Don't show me plans that have 2 exterior doors to the basement. The zoning board of Lakewood does not allow there to be any way to have 2 means of egress and ingress to the basement. So even if one door is the door that goes both up and down at the same time, and then you have a separate basement entrance, that's not going to work if you want to come to the zoning board because you can only have one entrance because they're trying to ensure that there will not be 2 basements, which is not legal under Lakewood's ordinance in the basement. In addition, they will not allow any entrances that would lead you directly to the attic. So in other words, there cannot be direct exterior access to the attic, which would enable someone to rent out their attic, which, mind you, I don't think there really is anybody in Lakewood renting out their attics currently, but maybe this is why. They're very careful to make sure. The zoning board also insists that every house that comes before them has to be 1/3 stone, stucco, or brick. It could be an upgraded siding. We'll take a look at that. We do want to see the exterior of the facade of the residence so that we can tell them this isn't going to work and you're going to have to come up with something that's a little more upgraded. So these are just some examples of why we would want to see the plans. Typically, the architects are not as clued in with what goes on in front of the boards because they don't typically come to the hearings. So sometimes we'll get architectural plans and we'll look at them and we'll say, this just isn't going to work. They'll give me a basement and they have a sewing room and an exercise room and a library. Right. And we look at it and we go bedroom. Right. And then there's a Pesach kitchen and then there's a snack bar. And we go, they're going to be able to figure out right away. There's another Pesach kitchen on the main floor. So the Pesach kitchen in the basement, that's not really a Pesach kitchen. Snack bar is not a really good terminology because they know that means a kitchen.
Right.
These
Midnight
kind of things.
snack bar. It sounds like there's a lot of strategy that goes into putting an approval together and going in front of the board. Do you have any crazy stories? It sounds like people have probably come to you with 6 or 7 exterior doors for a basement apartment.
Oh, I actually had a great one. I had one not too long ago where they came to me with an existing house and they basically wanted to do an addition to the house that basically added a second house onto it. So this was in the R12 zone. The R12 zone is the real residential zone in Lakewood. It does not allow duplexes. And essentially what they came up with was this structure that essentially was a duplex, but it wasn't supposed to look like it. So it had 2 front doors and everything else. And then each one of those structures had essentially an apartment in the basement, and it was pretty obvious that each one had an apartment in the basement. But anyway, the funny part came when they came in front of the board, and one of the members said to them, so would you agree to eliminate one of the front doors? Because they got it, but they were pretty much going to let them get away with it, I think. And they said, no, we need both of those doors. At which point they said, okay, this is a duplex. You could call it whatever you want. It acts like a duck. It quacks like a duck. It walks like a duck. It's a duck. I don't care what you want to call it, but this is a duplex. And it got denied. And I felt bad. The applicant was so upset. And I said, I don't understand. Like, they asked you the question straight out. Would you remove the second front door? And you said no. You made it very clear that you needed two front doors because there were going to be two separate families that were living in each of these two structures. That's not going to work.
Right.
And they could have done it. It was a corner lot. So mind you, they could have had a door on the side, which would have worked. It's interesting. So,
and now under that law that you told us, they can't go back unless there's substantial change.
Correct. So under res judicata, that is a very good point. Good. You're good.
I'm listening.
You are good and you're listening. Yes, they would really be barred from going back with the same application. So they haven't gone back yet. I don't know what they're trying to do.
What they're going to change. Something big is coming.
I have another one coming where the duplex got denied. The duplex was not a permitted use in that zone. The duplex got denied. And now they're coming back with what they're calling a two-family home. The difference with the exact same dimension. So it needs the exact same variances in terms of setbacks and coverage and everything else. But they're saying that it's a two-family home and not a duplex, which means that it's one owner. And I guess they'd have to condo it in order to get 2 units. But remains to be seen if the board is actually going to say that this gets barred by res judicata or not. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about in a commercial setting? Have you had any crazy stories or somebody super ambitious that you had to work with?
Commercial, we're sitting right now in Lakewood's, what do you call this? The
corporate park.
Corporate park. I got many, probably most of the approvals in this corporate park. Those are actually for my easier approvals.
Were they because they probably all fit the criteria, right?
They were really fully conforming. There were almost no variances on these beautiful office buildings that I can look out my window from where I'm sitting and seeing. And I used to say they actually were probably my easiest approvals. I did have
So you're saying if you follow the rules, it's easy to get approved?
Correct.
Okay.
If you follow the rules, not only that, I didn't tell you this, but if you come in front of the planning board and you follow every rule, it's what we call an as of right application. The planning board has to approve it. They can't deny it. So yes, those are actually easy. And it's interesting to think that even though we were dealing with these multi-million-dollar buildings that were being built, these were easy approvals. And somebody could come in with a house in the R75 zone and it's a much more difficult approval.
Interesting.
The other big key is if the neighbors like it or the neighbors don't like it. If you have objectors and they're coming out and they're fighting it.
Can we talk about the neighbors a little bit? So how does that part of the process work? Who do you have to notify?
Good question. So the way it works is that we have to notify all neighbors within 200 feet. We have to send a certified letter that we have to mail at least 10 days prior to the hearing. Now, that sometimes is very frustrating for the neighbors because if we mail them on 10 days prior to either a zoning board or planning board, it means they get mailed on a Friday. If they get mailed on a Friday, they sometimes arrive on Shabbos. If they arrive on Shabbos, they're not able to sign for them, so they may not see that. They'll get a note on their door. They won't see it till Monday or Tuesday or whenever they decide to pick it up, or it says it came from Miriam Weinstein in my case, so they may either call me or email me to ask me what the notice said. In addition to that, the current rules say we have to publish in the Asbury Park Press. That's actually getting changed. I don't remember exactly how they come up, but we will be able to publish on a forum such as the Lakewood Scoop.
Interesting.
Which will make much more sense because you know and I know, Chaya, nobody reads the Asbury Park Press and people do look at the Lakewood Scoop. So they are going to be allowing electronic media, and I forgot there are actual criteria to it. It has to have readership of X, whatever the number is. I remember when we were looking at it, we said, wow, the Lakewood Scoop would be great. And I think it would really be much better. For our purposes here, we're going to focus mostly on Lakewood. It would just make so much more sense because it would actually serve the purpose that it's intended to. I don't really think that the people in Lakewood really see the notices in the Asbury Park Press.
Not unless they're looking. I would assume not.
Correct. But it does have to run currently in the Asbury Park Press at least 10 days prior, which means for my purposes, we have to get that to the newspaper by Tuesdays is the deadline for the zoning board, and Wednesday is the deadline for the planning board because the zoning board meetings in Lakewood take place on Monday nights and the planning board meetings in Lakewood take place on Tuesday nights.
So that was actually going to be my next question to you. I know dealing with you on other projects and other transactions, you have certain days that you're like, I have to get ready for the planning board. I have to get ready for the zoning board. So I know you really said that you did this and you took this on because you had a bunch of little kids at that time. But what do the nights before going to the board look like for you?
So one of the reasons that the honest truth is that I focus my land use practice mostly on Lakewood. And the reason for that is because it means giving up too many nights. Each town has meetings on various nights. Each town will have planning board meetings on one night and zoning board meetings on another. Now, the planning board meetings in Lakewood, it used to be that you had 2 a month. And the first one was the technical hearing. And the second one was the public hearing. So the way it would work would be that you first came in front of the board for them to analyze all the technical aspects of your plan. And then once they were satisfied with that and they said, okay, this is good to go forward, then they scheduled it for public hearing and you came in front of the public hearing. I'm trying to remember exactly when, probably during COVID, when all the meetings went to Zoom. It's actually not Zoom, it's WebEx, but same concept. When they went to WebEx, they started doing all of the technical meetings at the planning board are done on WebEx. So they're still done on Tuesdays, but they're done Tuesday afternoon at 1:00, which for me is a godsend because obviously I'd much prefer to do those meetings during my workday than in the evenings. But technically speaking, the planning board still officially has 2 meetings a month. The zoning board is typically once a month on Monday nights, the first Monday of every month. But it varies because there are holidays that have to be taken into account, both Jewish holidays and non-Jewish holidays. During the month of August, the zoning board never meets. So they usually do 2 in July. And it gets complicated. Sometimes it's fast days. It's very interesting. The planning board secretary has really learned. She usually actually gives me the schedule. I'm usually good. She'll look at it and I'll go, that's not going to work. That's Shavasa Patamas. There is no way that on a fast that ends at 9:30 at night, we're coming to the planning board at 6:00. And even
You'll have a lot of hangry people then.
So they actually, either this year or last year, they did schedule at Shavasa Patamas. They didn't listen to me, but they ultimately canceled it because nobody was interested in coming. So yeah. But anyway, back to where we started. I don't tend to do so much work in Jackson or Toms River in terms of going in front of the boards. I do take on a lot of the acquisition projects just because there's a limited number of nights that a human being can work when they work a whole day.
Right.
So maybe this year, since I'm in Avelis and I can't go to weddings, maybe I'm actually contemplating really doing more. But even when my kids were very little, it was almost impossible. And you asked me to answer the question fairly. You asked me what was it like in terms of the nights before. So first of all, I try to prepare for the applications during the workday, but it's hard. I also do a lot of closings for a living. I have contracts that need to be reviewed. I have closings. I have inspections. I have all kinds of other things that are going on during the workday. It does require concentration.
Yeah.
And I like to come prepared. I like to have an outline in front of me so that I know what I'm saying when I get up there. I do typically do that either at night or in the very early morning hours. So that part's hard. And then there's the actual nights themselves. It's an entire night out. You always have to budget. It's a whole night out. Doesn't matter. Depends where they put you on the agenda. There's no way to know exactly how long the ones in front of you are going to take. Many nights I have 2 or 3 applications. So even if I have the first one on the agenda, which would mean I get out at a normal hour, the later ones are not. And they scatter them all over the place. And,
you sit there all night.
So I end up sitting there all night. So it's hard to miss that many nights. And as I said, as my kids got older, well, then first I had the bar mitzvah stage and I had bar mitzvahs. And then obviously now I'm at the wedding stage where I have all my friends' children's weddings. And it's hard to miss your very close friend's wedding because you have to be at the
you're working.
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
That's kind of the reason that I've steered away from doing much more land use.
So once you have the engineer, the architect, you have your outline together, what happens at the actual meetings?
To go back a step, the preparation really does. It starts a week in advance now. Typically, we'll do a Zoom meeting between myself, the engineers, the architects, the applicant, and make sure we're getting everything in order. I'll probably, on my way back from here, drive past a few sites. Some of them are right in the area here. I like to drive past the sites to see them, and I like to do that during daylight hours. You can see a lot more when it's daylight than you can at night. So there's all of that. But now when we get to the actual meeting, there is an agenda. Sometimes they don't follow the order in the agenda. There's also going to be the question, we skipped a little bit about the neighbors. It depends very often lately. Now, as towns get more and more and more developed, neighbors become more anti-development. So what has happened is that a lot of applications end up with a lot of opposition. So if I'm dealing with an application and there are objectors, it may be that the board is going to switch around the order because it depends. There's sometimes I'll have one objector that hired an attorney. I actually have one now where there are various sets of neighbors objecting, and there are 2 separate objecting attorneys, each of which would probably spend an entire night just doing their testimony. So all of this has to get taken into account. And obviously that affects the way we prepare, that affects the scheduling, and a lot of things are depending on this. It's actually rare today that we get an application that doesn't really have any neighbors objecting to it in Lakewood.
I would think social media is also doing its job because it's letting more and more people know. Like you said, nobody's seeing it in the APP. But once it goes out on social, now everybody knows, let's go. We don't want to have this use in our backyard. Everybody come out and object.
So it's a very good point. Social media has really changed the face of zoning, for sure in Lakewood. I don't want to speak for other towns, but yes, things get posted on WhatsApp statuses and
Neighborhood chats, I'm sure.
Neighborhood chats and all these kind of places. And they definitely rile up the whole neighborhood. If one person may be really the only one objecting, but then they get all their neighbors on board and you don't want this here. And mind you, it's typically the schools and the shuls and the meistas that get the most objection. The one that disturbed me the most was the recent ladies' mikvah that I got approved. And there was a lot of opposition to a ladies' mikvah, and it was a true ladies' mikvah, and it was just very upsetting to me. They actually hired a non-Jewish attorney to go up against the ladies' mikvah, and when I called him, I said, do you even understand what this is? Yes, I do. I really do, and I want you to know they're not really opposed to the use, they're just opposed to you're putting the use in this location. And then it was so hard for me to deal with it and to try to explain it to him without making a chilul Hashem. And by the way, I didn't tell you that part. I'm very Yekish. I come from a very Yekish background. I went to Breuer's, if those of you know, in Washington Heights. And one of my mottos in life is, how can I make a Kiddush Hashem? And I always tell this to all my clients. Sometimes they'll come to me and I say, just remember, I know this is very important to you, but the most important thing that we can do on this earth is to make a Kiddush Hashem and not make a Chilul Hashem. Well, many of these applications turn out to be not a Kiddush Hashem, let's just put it that way. There was one recently where they brought one of the Rosh Yeshiva of BMG down to the board, and they had him testify in front of the planning board, and they really made a mockery of him. I was crying for him. I was sitting in the audience, and I was literally crying. And I said, this is just not right. This is not what the Rosh Yeshiva's job is, and it's just not right. Or going back to my original example, which is where I'm dealing with a ladies' mikvah, and I have a non-Jewish attorney on the other side, and he's trying to maneuver it, and he called me after the fact to tell me that he was embarrassed, that he was getting paid to do it, so he knew he had to do it, but he was really embarrassed that he was fighting us. It's hard. It's really getting very hard. And while I do understand where the neighbors are coming from, and I understand NIMBY and nobody wants anything in their backyard, that's true. But I always feel like the better way that this should be addressed is really try to talk to people before. And by the way, that's another piece. When there are objectors, I always try to get them. Can we sit down? Could we have a meeting in my office? Do you ever
have those meetings?
We do. We really do. Sometimes they work better. In most recent months and years, not as much. Years ago, we used to. And I remember doing many shuls where, yes, I remember doing meetings on Sunday afternoon in my office where we got all the people from the neighborhood together and we sat down and we said, what would make you happy? Can we frost the windows? We understand you have 7 daughters and you really don't want a boys' masifta next door to you. But do you understand that we need a boys' masifta? Like okay, you don't have sons.
Maybe you could put somewhere in that they can get the top pick from the yeshiva or something. You got to get creative.
That would have been good.
That's all about real estate, right? The creativity.
You got to be creative. But we learned to say to them, what kind of screening would work for you? Let's try to figure it out. Let's say that, where your daughter's bedrooms are, they can't have dorm windows on the sides that your daughter's windows are. Really, all the windows have to be frosted. Each side has to be considerate of the other side. And obviously, we will explain, let's say, to the yeshiva client, you have to be considerate. Your next door neighbor does have 7 daughters, many of whom are teenagers. You want to have a dormitory of teenage boys. Does this work? Or, I have an even better one, which was the time that a seminary approached me and they wanted to buy a property to put their seminary right across the street from a boys' dorm. And I said to them,
Miriam, you could have solved the shidduch crisis.
Yeah. I probably could have.
What a lost opportunity.
So maybe I shouldn't have done what I did. But I said to them, do you really think this is an appropriate location? Not only that, the boys' dorm is 5 blocks away from where the actual yeshiva is. So at night, that boys' dorm, it's just a bunch of boys. And the girls' seminary was just going to be a girls' dorm. And I'm like, this is a recipe for disaster, guys. This is just not going to work. And I remember the seminary was so disappointed. Really? You really think so? And I honestly did not let them buy the property. And it might have been your listing. I don't remember. So I don't know, but it didn't make sense. So some of this, I guess, comes from experience. Some of this is maybe we need females to be in this business. Like some things I just go, guys, this doesn't work.
Think it through. Did you think this through?
Maybe we could solve the shidduch crisis, but I don't think that's what we wanted to do. Exactly. And then I think I said to them, did you ask the Rosh Yeshiva of that boys' masifta permission if you could go here? No, why should I do that? I'm like, he was there first. I get it, but the way the dynamics of this particular scenario work out, it's not even like in his building. It's a few blocks away. Maybe they have some sort of dorm counselor in these boys' dorms, but probably not. And same thing in the girls' dorms. Is there really always like some sort of dorm counselor, madricha, I don't know, in a girls' seminary? I don't know, it's been a lot of years since I was in seminary, so I don't know. I don't know, but do we think that this makes sense? And there's also, by the way, other considerations talking about seminaries or yeshivas. When they come, seminary gets more complicated. You want to have a seminary or girls' high school. You have to think about busing. Are the buses going to be able to come in and out? And obviously there's all of that. Actually, seminary gets more complicated because girls probably drive to seminary.
Right.
They don't really have a bus. So that factors into play. There are just so many little pieces to this puzzle that I think you need the people that just get it. You just have to get it, and you have to be able to take all these pieces, put them together, and make sure that the location is a good location.
To start, before you even start with everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just get back to the actual night of getting the approvals. So now you're up. It's your turn. You're on the agenda. Where do you go from here?
It's my turn. I get up in front of the board and say, "Good evening, members of the board. Miriam Weinstein, attorney for Banana Street Applicant LLC." And then from there, obviously, I'll give a short description of the application. And then what my job is actually is to elicit testimony from the witnesses. So typically the main witness on any land use application is going to be the engineer or the planner. In Lakewood, even depending, no matter who the engineer is, usually Brian Flannery is the planner of choice. He's been involved with the Lakewood community, for over 30 years now, and really gets it. So he is typically the planner, although I will say that now going forward, there are a few new engineers and planners who are doing great jobs, and we're having them do a lot of the testifying. I guess Brian's getting older in years and probably wants to retire soon. So even if he's listening to this, it's probably a good thing that we are finally getting some new young blood, and really some of them are very, very good. So again, my job is really to ask pointed questions to the engineer. Sometimes we'll call the architect. The architects don't like to come, and most of those kind of questions can be answered by the engineer. We also have traffic consultants, traffic engineers. If it's anything pretty much commercial, schools, we would want to get the testimony of a traffic consultant. Schools, typically, we would bring the head of the school as a witness. We'll ask them questions. They're going to want to know the hours of operation. They're going to want to know the total number of students. What's the maximum number of students you could have? What's the number of students you have now? How many classes do you have per level? If it's a boys' elementary school, what are the hours of operation? And obviously, we'd have to explain to them that the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys come from Minion, so they come earlier. Then you have the rest of the school coming. Then you have various dismissals. Primary gets out first. Then you have year 1 through 5. Then your 6th, 7th, and 8th get out at a different time. And all of this has to be brought out together with the traffic engineer so that they can make sure that the traffic works, that the bus stacking works, how you're stacking the buses, where you're putting the buses. So that testimony typically comes from a traffic engineer. If we're dealing with a Mesivta, they want to know how many boys there are in a dorm. Are there dorms? Actually, Mesivtas typically don't have dorms in Lakewood. They only have a dorm for their 12th grade or their Beis Medrash, which would be first year Beis Medrash. If we're dealing with a post-Mesivta or a Beis Medrash, as we call it, those have dorms. And by the way, dorms are another whole thing as a result of a recent case. Dormitories are not a permitted use in Lakewood. So now every single Mesivta and Beis Medrash application has to be heard by the zoning board. By the way, that's one of the reasons that the zoning board agenda is now backed up for months, and the planning board has actually been pretty empty because the planning board used to handle most of the school applications, and now every single Mesivta and Beis Medrash application has to go to the zoning board by definition because the dormitory use is not a permitted use.
Wow.
Yeah, another interesting tidbit. In Jackson, it's a permitted use, by the way, a dorm.
I actually did hear that it's easier to get a dorm in Jackson than it is in Lakewood, and I thought that was very odd based on our statistics over here.
It actually may be easier to get any kind of approval in Jackson today than it is in Lakewood, but I guess it's...
How have you seen over the years the approval process go? And where do you think it's going?
So the approval process has definitely changed. And like I said, I'm working in Lakewood zoning since the year 2002, I believe, when I sat on the zoning board. It's changed a lot. There's less and less land left in Lakewood. Obviously, there's a finite amount of land. In 2002, you still had big open tracts. So we were doing a lot of approvals for those 72-unit projects. Very rarely do we come across a 72-unit or anything close to that project in Lakewood. In Jackson, they are seeing those projects. So there's a lot more schools and a lot more shuls. Lakewood has grown by leaps and bounds. There are just so many more people here today than there are 25 years ago. 25 years ago, we only needed one ladies' mikvah. Today, obviously, that's not going to work either.
Right.
So you see a lot more applications for Meistis. You see a lot more shul applications. And again, by the way, shuls have become contentious. Neighbors don't want shuls. They do want shuls in their neighborhood, but they don't want simcha halls in their neighborhood. So it gets complicated because we have to figure it out. And also, because land is scarce and because there's a finite amount of land, but every neighborhood needs every type of shul. So you need a Sephardi shul, and you need a Hasidic shul, and you need a Haimish shul, and you need this type of Ashkenaz shul, and that type of Ashkenaz shul, and whatever. So what ends up happening is there isn't enough land for the shuls to really put in adequate parking. It's the truth. There really isn't. So one of the things that we try to do is to work out that they're neighborhood shuls, and therefore there really will be people that are walking. But again, you know as well as I do, we're females, so we don't have the issue, but
Right.
the men don't walk when it rains, it snows, but even in developments, the men do really tend to drive to shul. And
Yeah.
then comes the question of what happens when there's a bris in the morning. Again, I don't feel like you're going to design a shul for when there's a bris in the morning. There isn't a bris every single day, and we have to try to make certain things work. And it's a very interesting toss-up because we want simcha halls, we need simcha halls, but where do we put simcha halls? Because
Right.
nobody wants them in their neighborhood. So the town came up with this great ordinance that they passed that says you can only have them in non-residential neighborhoods. So it sounds great to have all your simcha halls on Oak Street, but that doesn't work either, because try coming down Oak Street any night there's a wedding, and we all know
few
what
weddings.
goes on.
Right.
Right. Every single school on Oak Street has a wedding hall today, so that I don't know how many are there right now. I can't even keep count. So it's a problem, and you really can't get in and out of Oak Street now. So I don't know if that was such a fabulous solution either. And then again, those are the wedding halls. We have wedding halls, and then we do need halls for varts and bar mitzvahs and
Sheva brachas.
Sheva brachas and et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of our own worst enemy is what I'm trying to get at, because we all know that we need all of these venues, and at the same time, we all don't want them in our backyards. So this is what goes on. So I think in Jackson, back to that, it's simpler because there's more land right now. So
For now. So where do you see, on that note, where do you see the approval process going?
Jackson's probably going to get more similar to Lakewood eventually. Jackson was very difficult at the beginning. The makeup of the boards has changed a lot. The demographics of Jackson have changed. So now that the demographics of Jackson have changed, things have changed, and it's actually become easier to get any approval that makes sense. Also, there's probably more that's conforming there because the way their zoning rules are structured and because there's more land. So they have specific sites that they designate for property, certain zones that are designated for schools and shuls, and they actually have land in those zones to fit them. In Lakewood, we don't really have a school zone. A school is a permitted use in any zone.
Anywhere except the ABC zone.
Right. The schools are permitted use in any zone except the ABC zone. There is officially a school overlay zone, but it's still being litigated. By the way, anytime they try to pass an ordinance in Lakewood, it goes for litigation. So the Simcha Hall ordinance is still being litigated. The school overlay zone is still being litigated. And even in the school overlay zone, which is in the Cross Street area, it's complicated because there are residences there. There are people living there. And I understand why they are fighting the ordinance, because at the end of the day, they don't want to see their neighborhood just overrun with schools. That doesn't work so well for the...
But they do want their kids in school. So like I said, it's a toss-up.
So this is the toss-up I was getting at before. Exactly. They want their kids to be in school. They want a lot of things. We need all of these essential parts of our infrastructure. But again, nobody wants them in their backyard. And it's...
Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of strategy. Is there a lot of politics that come into play? Is there a lot of psychology that comes into play?
So there's definitely politics and there's definitely psychology. There's always going to be politics. There's always going to be certain neighbors are better politically connected than others. They know the right people to get everybody riled up and everybody on board to really not be happy with this application. And if that happens, it's just not going to happen. And
Do you have it the other way around also?
Which is what?
When they're going for the application, you have certain people that have an easier time?
Oh, for sure. Welcome to the world. It just is what it is. There are definitely people that are more connected and they get what they want, and somebody else could come with the very same application and they're not connected and they may not get what they want, but welcome to the world. Are there people that get into schools easier than other people? Yes, because they have better connections and better protexia. That happens across the world. In a perfect world, it wouldn't happen, but we all know that this is not a perfect world. So yes, that does happen.
So you're saying that the playing field is not necessarily even.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, before we end off, is there any last minute stories or inspiration that you want to share with our listeners? Or anything specific, if they do decide that they want to purchase something and go for an approval, is there any specific pitfalls that you can help us prevent? Or
when someone's looking to purchase a property, the key element, if you want to get something approved, is to really think does this use fit on this particular site? And that's really what's key. Look around at what else exists in the site. Again, I'm mostly referring to Lakewood. Sure, it could be Jackson too, and I get calls all the time for schools that want to go to Jackson. Does it fit? For example, actually, a good example in Jackson, you can put a school, but it has to be in a sewer service area. If it's not in a sewer service area, and then you're talking about a septic and you want to put it on a septic, it has to be a commercial septic, and that's very expensive. All these kind of factors. When somebody's looking at a property, I think what they really have to look at and say, is this site really suitable for this particular use? And to use Jackson as an example, I've had clients come to me. So I found a 33-acre parcel in Jackson. Is this well suited for Masefta or a base medrash? And then you take a look at it and go, no, because there is no sewer and the commercial septic is going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And does the price point make sense when you factor all of that in? And it's 33 acres, but it's very far from Lakewood, which is where most of your students are going to be bused from. So does it really make sense? And there's a lot that has to be factored in, and nothing against realtors. I love realtors, especially when I'm talking to you, but sometimes the realtors, some of them just want to make a sale. And they may just say, oh, this is great. It's 33 acres and it's going to work. And they're not as familiar with zoning.
They're forgetting that the buyer is not losing their number after the sale. That's the key point, by the way. If they keep that in mind, they're not just looking to make that sale.
You got to teach some of the younger agents that.
They'll learn. Right.
That's what happens. They learn over time. But so that's all part of it. So I think, back to your question, I think the real answer is to really, we got to give it a good look, and we got to look at it and say, is this particular site suited for the use that you want to put there? And then obviously it's worth spending the money to take it to the next step. And the next step is what we call due diligence. And this due diligence period, it does cost money and it does take time and it does take effort, but sometimes it doesn't even pay to get to that point. To let's say give the example of the seminary, they wanted to go across the street from the boys' dorm. I never really let them get it off the ground. It didn't make sense.
Right.
Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And all of that has to be factored in. And again, I could give you examples. I don't know how long you want to stay here. I could give you lots and lots of examples where somebody comes to me at the last minute when they're ready. Like I said, they're ready to send out the legal notices. They didn't consult me until that point. And I actually had this happen today. And then I turned to them and I go, I don't believe this is going to get approved because you're just a little bit too ambitious. But if you would have just taken off one unit, it would have been fully conforming. You could have gone to the planning board. You would have been guaranteed that it would get approved. We should have at least had this conversation because then you could have made the decision. But they didn't come to me. So we didn't have the conversation. And now I'm faced with, okay, we're going to go forward next week and we have to figure out what's the best way to do this and make it work.
And it's a gamble. And it's a gamble.
And it's a gamble. So a lot of that, like I said, I think one of the other very important parts is to say, always consult your land use attorney at the outset. They have valuable information. We have valuable information that we can provide to you from a legal perspective and also just from the knowledge of what we have in terms of going in front of the board. And also sometimes it's just a different perspective than the engineer. I always say a lot of it is a difference. And attorneys' payment structure is very different. The engineers coming in and they come in, their job is to just draw up the plans and they get paid X price for drawing up the plans. And it's definitely a lot more than us attorneys get paid. We kind of get paid half of it up front anyway. And so we're not talking about that much of a difference between what we get paid if we just do due diligence and then don't go through versus what we get at the end. I don't know. I always feel like maybe that's part of the difference, why we have a different perspective. I don't know. But it definitely we give a different perspective. We can come to you and say, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to get this. And whereas I feel like the engineers, their job is very technical. So they're just drawing up plans and showing you how they can make the numbers work.
And what you want.
Yeah, and you come to them and you say, I want this. And they say, this is how I would do it. And they're not looking, well, your lot coverage is going to be 42%. And the zoning board has really never, ever approved anything above 39%. And even the 39% was somebody very well connected. No, they're not going to do that. They're just going to throw it to the lawyers. And now it's, at the end of the day, it becomes our job. So sometimes, like I said, this is part of the reason that I feel everybody needs to work together from the beginning, and the architect as well, because there are definitely certain things that we get from the architect that and
everybody brings their area of expertise. And then together, if you're all communicating, that's probably the best chance of people getting the approval.
That's correct. That is correct. You got it.
Miriam, I cannot thank you enough. This was amazing. And I learned so much. And I hope our listeners learned that if they see a piece of property, to quickly tie it up, run to you and say, what can I do here?
Thank you, Chaya, for this opportunity. This was great. Looking forward to working together with you on many, many more projects.
Amen. That's it for today's episode of Just One Thing. If you've learned something new, feel a little more informed, or know someone who definitely needs to hear this, pass it on. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We've got more great conversations coming your way. One topic, one expert, one thing at a time. Until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and remember, it only takes one thing.